Did you know Winston Churchill, the man history remembers as the fearless architect of D-Day, actually tried to stop the invasion? Not delay it, not modify it. He wanted it called off entirely. And the reason why isn't what you think. There's a detail buried in Churchill's private wartime papers that rewrites the version of this story you learned in school. I'll get to it. But first, you need to understand what Churchill had already seen. Something so horrific it haunted him for 3 decades. This story is resurfacing now because historians Richard Dannat and Alan Packwood have been pulling apart Churchill's actual role in the planning of Operation Overlord. According to History Extra, BBC, their analysis reveals a Prime Minister far more conflicted, far more traumatized, and far more politically outmaneuvered than the bulldog caricature we've been sold. None of that was the real problem. The number that stopped me cold is coming up. To understand Churchill's resistance to D-Day, you have to go back to 1915. Gallipoli. Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, championed an ambitious amphibious assault on the Ottoman Empire. The plan was to force the Dardanelles Strait, capture Constantinople, and knock Turkey out of the war. It was bold, it was imaginative, and it was a catastrophe. Over 250,000 Allied casualties. Churchill was personally blamed, stripped of his position, and sent into political exile. He spent years rebuilding his career from the wreckage of that single, failed invasion. So when Allied planners began pushing for a massive cross-channel assault on Nazi-occupied France, the largest amphibious operation ever attempted, Churchill didn't see glory. He saw Gallipoli again. He saw thousands of soldiers drowning in the English Channel, their bodies washing up on beaches they never reached. That fear wasn't irrational. It was earned. By the way, if this kind of story grabs you, hit like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about the real history behind the myth. What I'm about to show you is the part most people are missing. Churchill didn't just privately worry about D-Day, he actively pushed alternatives hard, while the Americans, Eisenhower, Marshall, Roosevelt, insisted that a direct assault across the Channel was the only way to break Hitler's grip on Europe. Churchill lobbied relentlessly for what he called the soft underbelly strategy. Attack through the Mediterranean, hit Sicily, push up through Italy, strike into the Balkans, bleed the Germans from the south, and avoid the nightmare scenario of a failed Channel crossing. Here's where the villain-hero framing gets complicated, because Churchill wasn't wrong to be afraid. The English Channel is one of the most treacherous bodies of water on Earth. The tides are savage, the weather is unpredictable, and in 1942 and early 1943, the Allies didn't have enough landing craft, enough air superiority, or enough battle-hardened troops to pull it off. A premature invasion could have been the costliest military disaster in history. But Churchill's fear put him directly at odds with his most important ally. Roosevelt and the American military leadership grew increasingly suspicious that Churchill was stalling, not out of strategic wisdom, but out of imperial ambition, trying to protect British colonial interests in the Mediterranean. The tension between London and Washington came dangerously close to fracturing the entire alliance. Stay with me. The last part is what actually matters. Here's the detail that changes everything. By late 1943, Churchill didn't just accept D-Day, he became so emotionally invested in the operation that he insisted on personally watching the invasion from a warship off the Normandy coast. He wanted to be there, on the water, under fire. King George VI had to personally intervene to stop the 69-year-old Prime Minister from sailing into a war zone on June 6, 1944. Think about what that means. The same man who spent years trying to prevent this invasion, who saw in it the ghost of Gallipoli, who fought his own generals and his American allies to delay it, ultimately wanted to ride into battle alongside the troops. That isn't stubbornness. That's a man who realized the invasion had become inevitable, took ownership of it completely, and was willing to die proving his commitment. Churchill's evolution from D-Day's greatest skeptic to a leader who had to be physically restrained from joining the assault is one of the most dramatic psychological transformations of the entire war. Here is exactly what this tells us. Leadership isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do after the fear has had its say. Before I go, here is your historical footnote of the day. During the planning of D-Day, British intelligence ran one of the most elaborate deception operations in military history. Operation Fortitude. They created an entire fake army group, supposedly commanded by General George Patton, complete with inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, and scripted radio traffic. The Germans were so convinced this phantom force would invade at Pas-de-Calais that even after the real invasion hit Normandy, Hitler held back his panzer reserves for weeks, waiting for an attack that would never come. An army that didn't exist may have saved the invasion that almost didn't happen. That is your footnote for today. Churchill spent 30 years running from the ghost of one failed invasion, and then tried to physically ride into the next one. If that story changed how you see leadership, subscribe to Weird History. I cover this every single day. See you tomorrow.